Hi, good morning, everyone, and happy Friday. We are just getting started, so I'll give it a minute while people are coming into our webinar. We want to thank you for attending. This is the first part of our three-part series. We're going to be covering the CA 2030, stakeholder engagement, interviews and insights. I'll just give it another 30 seconds as folks are coming in. While we're waiting, can we go to the next slide? I'll just go over some housekeeping notes. So this webinar is being recorded today. All participants are muted during the presentation. You can use your raise the hand icon during our Q&A portion to request your line to be unmuted to ask a question. Closed captioning and ASL interpreting is available. You can access it by clicking the icons at the bottom of your Zoom screen. The Q&A is open, so you can submit your questions online, or like noted earlier, you can raise your hand and we can open your mics during the Q&A section. And today's presentation and recording will be archived. You can visit CDA's YouTube channel to access that. Now let's get started. I'd like to turn this over to our director, Susan Damaris.
Thank you very much, Connie, and good morning, everyone. We're so excited to be here today at the start of the big reveal of the work that's been happening with our California 2030 initiative. And before we turn it over to the content, I wanted to walk everyone who's joining us through a timeline of how we arrived at this milestone. So we'll go ahead and move to the next slide. I think if you're on this call, you're well aware of the demographic shift that's underway in our state, but we have some new data that we'd like to share. The reason this initiative is called California 2030, or CA 2030 is the shorthand, is to reflect the 1 in 4 Californians will be the age of 60 by the year 2030. This effort looks beyond 2030. The Department of Aging will be celebrating its 50th anniversary next year. So we're really looking well beyond 2030. And I wanted to share with you this slide that shows where California is headed through the year 2060. And you can see here that the under 18 and the 18 to 64 populations are experiencing a decline, while the 65 plus population has already started a steep increase. Next slide, please. When we look at our aging network, our framework of area agents, the 33 area agencies on aging, we wanted to also share with you how the population is shifting in our state in terms of where people live. And I think, I can't think of any other area where we can cite increases of 682%. And even the lowest on this slide, the Northern and Sierra areas, are experiencing a 189% increase in the 65 plus population. So these demographic trends and facts are really influencing our work as we plan for the future. Next slide. So this work started years ago in May of 2020. It actually started in 2019 with the governor's executive order for the Master Plan for Aging. And the first deliverable for the Master Plan for Aging was the LTSS subcommittee report. And in that report, stakeholders outlined 5 bold objectives. All of these relate to California 2030, and in particular, objective number 5, streamlining state and local administrative structures, is one of the objectives of California 2030. Next slide, please. The LTSS subcommittee report was followed by the governor's release, the official release of the Master Plan for Aging, with 5 bold goals, 23 strategies, and 132 initiatives. In the first round of initiatives, initiative number 101 addressed many of the components of the California 2030 initiative. And you'll see here, for those who recall, We've now replaced that initiative, but it addressed the Older Americans Act, our local area maps, funding formulas, and the AAA designations. Next slide, please. That sparked intensive work by the Department of Aging in consultation with our academic partner, Cal State University, Sacramento, where there was a series of webinars and town halls, as well as solicitations of public feedback and letters that were received through the Hubs and Spokes series. And in April of last year, we shared our findings from that intensive work with stakeholders. Next slide. The Hubs and Spokes work shaped our engagement with collaborative consulting, and we took all of that input under consideration, and we were thrilled when we were able to enter into a contract with collaborative consulting for a one-year contract that started in November of last year. Today, we're at about the midpoint, and we'll be unveiling for you today and in July and August the key findings and more to come on that as well. The California 2030 project and the steering committee that was formed have been directed to focus on 6 areas: programs and services, funding sources and capacities, key performance measures, governance, geography and demographics, and branding, communications, and outreach. This effort, California 2030, is focused on the 33 area agencies on aging in our state. Next slide. I want to thank all of the members of the California 2030 Steering Committee. We have key representation from leading organizations in our state. We have the California Association of Area Agencies on Aging, known as C4A. We have the California Commission on Aging. We have the California Foundation for Independent Living Centers, the California State Association of Counties, and the County Welfare Directors Association. So each of these organizations submitted names, and this is who makes up our steering committee. So thank you all for your service and your continued service through the end of this year. Next slide. In January of this year, the governor updated the master plan for aging for the 2023-2024 legislative cycle, and we released 95 new initiatives. And I wanted to call attention to one initiative in particular, Initiative 74, which is the California 2030 initiative. So the work that we're talking about today is part of a larger context, the master plan for aging, and a bigger goal area and strategy. But you'll see here that we're really proud to be making headway on Initiative 74. And there's related work too. When you look at Goal 3 and Strategy F, there are about 4 or 5 initiatives that relate to this work, but this is the specific initiative that we've been charged to implement. Next slide, please. We're thrilled that the Federal Administration on Community Living this month released a notice of proposed rulemaking calling for public input for the first time since 1988 on the Older Americans Act. So the work that's happening in California, the sense of urgency that we're experiencing, the momentum that's building is shared at the federal level. And we're so excited that the work of California 2030 is feeding into our official public comments that we will be making in July and August of this year at the request of the Administration on Community Living. And we're moving into a phase of action and taking all of this input and feedback and using it to make changes and to take action. And next slide. Key to the California 2030 effort, we want to be certain that anything that goes forward is person-centered, equity-focused, and data-driven. And we're delighted that we're able to launch California's first ever community assessment survey for older adults. This is referred to as CASOA, and we're embarking on that this summer with our AAA partners and community-based organizations throughout the state to reach older adults in all 58 counties in multiple languages, and to use the data from the CASOA survey also to influence and shape the California 2030 findings. And next slide. So that walks you through the timeline. The focus today will be on the work, the stakeholder input from the first wave. But before we move to collaborative consulting, I wanted to invite Michael Costa, a member of our steering committee and one of the 80 stakeholders who was interviewed for this phase of the work, to share a few remarks. Michael, welcome.
Thank you, Susan. It's really great to be here. And I feel honored to have been one of the interviewees on this project. It's really hard to overestimate the impact this project can have on the future of aging service delivery in California. And to have a focus that really has thought through in a process for gathering information, analyzing that information, and coming up with strategies and recommendations for how we could build an integrated, a more integrated network of aging service deliveries going forward is really thoughtful. And Susan is right. A lot of other states are looking at what's going on in California and really looking for guidance on how you really approach this effort. AAA's, of which I am the executive director of the association that represents all 33 area agencies on aging in California. We were established 50 years ago, and a lot of our AAA's in California are celebrating their 50th anniversary this year. To really be the kind of the framework and the basic superstructure of the aging delivery service system. And you know, 50 years later, we really need to think through how we do things. We've gradually grown in terms of what we do over the time. We do Older Americans Act services. We do Older Californians Act services. We're now involved in CalAIM and getting involved in contracting with healthcare. But a project like this, which really pulls together information from a wide range of stakeholders, is really crucial to help form and inform the development of the future networks. So I want to thank the department and the governors also for kind of really providing the structure that allows us to think through this in a good way. So thank you, Susan, and your staff for really putting this together.
Thank you, Michael. And before I introduce Lori Peterson, who is the executive lead for collaborative consulting, I want to thank the 80 stakeholders who took the time to be interviewed and to contribute to this first phase of work. It's a very impressive list of local, regional, state, and federal thought and opinion leaders in the aging network. So my personal thanks to all of you who contributed to this phase of work. And now it is my pleasure to introduce all of you to Lori Peterson and to thank Lori and her extraordinary team for their incredible work. They've been fantastic partners and continue to be excellent partners in this work. Lori.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you, Michael, for a few comments there. Good morning, everybody. So our plan today is we want to offer just a quick view of the California 2030 project approach. So you kind of see where we are, where we're headed. We want to highlight the themes of the stakeholder interviews. I think you heard Susan mention this is one of many rounds of engagement and research we're conducting, which I'll spotlight in a moment. And then we're going to leave ample time for participants, which thank you for joining this morning, to ask questions about the stakeholder interviews, but also in general, if you have questions about the California 2030 project. But before we get started, just a few things I would like for you to keep in mind. So you will hear us talk about the California Aging Network. You'll hear us refer to that over and over in this presentation. And in the context of California 2030, this project, when we say the California Aging Network, we're talking about the 33 area agencies on aging, so the 33 AAAs and CDA. So just a little context setting there. And what we're offering today is only one piece of information, of research that we've been doing and will be doing throughout the year. And what we're going to offer are stakeholder perspectives. These are not recommendations. These are not commitments at this point in time. This is what we heard from 80 stakeholders that we interviewed over, I think, early spring. All right, so with those few disclaimers on the front end, Allison, let's get started with the first slide here. So here's a snapshot of the project design. The purpose of California 2030 is to imagine and design a future-ready California aging network to serve a larger, older, and more diverse population of older Californians. To achieve that purpose, we designed a year-long project, starting with creating the foundation and bringing together a steering committee, which Michael's part of, and Susan named off several other steering committee members who have been instrumental in guiding the project and offering very valuable insights and wisdom. The project also supports a very robust research and discovery phase, and I'm going to spotlight the different phases, the different types of research that we've been conducting and will continue to conduct. And then all of this really builds into kind of this last part of the project where we'll be looking at different scenarios or different possibilities that would need to happen to materialize a future-ready California aging network. And then the final deliverable will be a set of actionable recommendations in those 6 core focus areas that Susan mentioned earlier. So that's just a kind of a snapshot of the project design and the approach that we have been taking and will continue to take through the rest of this year. Next slide. You heard me mention that the project supports a pretty robust discovery and research phases of work. And here's everything that we've been doing. We'll continue to do stakeholder perspectives, which is the focus of today's webinar. In July, we will go over what we heard from AAAs. So we had the honor to talk to all 33 AAAs and multiple people, multiple staff members within each AAA. So in July, please join us again, because we're going to be going over the AAA stakeholder perspectives. We're doing quite a bit of digging around in data, AAAs and the CDA data. Promising practices in August. We will have a 3rd webinar where we'll feature our promising practices research, which we're really looking at what can we learn from other states. So the promising practice research is very focused on the 6 focus areas, and it's also looking at what other states are doing and what we might be able to translate back over into the state of California. And then we're doing trends and projections. And then, as Susan mentioned, the older adult needs assessment, which we are not conducting, but we will take that data and incorporate it into our final deliverable. Next slide, Allison. All right, so again, we are focused on the stakeholder interview themes this morning. If you are looking at your screen and can see this slide, we talked to 80 stakeholders representing a breadth and depth of perspective, associations, funders, researchers, thought leaders, innovators in aging, historians, community-based organizations, and other state government officials. So those are the stakeholders we're talking about today. And what we wanted to learn from stakeholders, or what we asked stakeholders, are in four key categories. We wanted to hear their perspective on what's probable. And so what are the emerging trends that the California Aging Network needs to be paying attention to, and why? What challenges and opportunities will the California Aging Network face? but also what challenges and opportunities will the people that the network serves face? And how will desires and needs be shifting and changing? So we really wanted to get a sense of their perspective on trends, which I'm going to highlight in a moment. We also wanted to hear their perspectives on, well, what's possible? So what does a future-ready California aging network look like? What would need to change? What might stay the same? How would those changes occur? Who needs to change? What stakeholders in the system would need to change? What types of programs and policies and services would need to be in place to reach those possibilities? The third category was around prioritizing and strategizing. So if we're thinking about what's possible, we wanted to hear stakeholders' perspectives on what would the priority strategies need to look like, both from a strategic perspective, but also from an operational point of view. What types of partnerships and alliances would need to be in place? And then how would we define success? How would we know that this future-ready California Aging Network is achieving what we intended it to achieve? And then finally, we wanted to hear about what are some of the innovations that they're seeing in the marketplace? What are some lessons that they've learned from other initiatives, similar or not similar? And if you have an opportunity to read the report once it's final, in the back of the report, we listed almost every practice, innovation, new care and delivery model that we heard from stakeholders. So the report is also loaded with a ton of resources. So highly recommend you taking a look at the report if possible. And so, as you can imagine, we had a massive amount of interview data. And we had somebody on our team who's a very skilled qualitative researcher who did not conduct any of the interviews. We had her go through the interview data, analyze it, synthesize it, and really form kind of overarching themes revealed. And that trends, obviously the current and the future, vision, which I'll talk just a little bit about, ideal traits of a future-ready California Aging Network, and then the action that would be needed to achieve this future-ready California Aging Network. Now, these are just the 4 overarching themes that came out of the interviews. There's multiple sub-themes within each of these big categories. Today, we're only going to provide the bullet point version of the themes from the interviewees. And again, I would encourage you, once the report is made public, to dive into the details a little bit in more detail. I'm going to talk about trends and vision, and then I'll turn it over to Jacob, and he'll talk a little bit more about the ideal traits and the action part. So here we are, trends. I'm not going to say much about California's becoming older and more diverse. I think Susan gave some great statistics. Stakeholders not only gave statistics on this, they also talked about just their experience. Someone was talking about looking around at the grocery store or in the community, and this trend definitely being at play. The second was around care needs are increasing in complexity, and stakeholders offered quite a few examples around the number of people with dementia will continue to rise. I think multiple people gave the projection around it doubling by 2040. Folks talked about the behavioral health needs and those being on the rise for a variety of reasons, social isolation, lack of support circles, implications of the pandemic. They also talked about increasing comorbidities, which would lead to more complex care needs. The intersectionality of aging and disability is growing, and stakeholders offered multiple opportunities that this might bring for the California Aging Network in the way that programs and services are designed and delivered. I should say one thing very quickly again, is that not only did stakeholders offer trends, they offered their ideas on the implications that these trends would have on the California Aging Network, and that's also included in the report. There are greater social and health vulnerabilities, and stakeholders really had quite a bit of energy and input around this particular theme area. There were multiple sub-themes. They talked about older adults experiencing more economic instability and poverty. They talked about the severe lack of affordable housing. They talked about more homelessness. They also pointed to the extreme weather events getting more extreme, and navigating those conditions would cause more risk and negative impacts for older Californians. So this was an area that stakeholders had quite a bit of input and energy. Consumer desires, preferences, and needs are evolving. A couple things mentioned here, one being around more older adults will stay in the workforce longer, some because they want to stay engaged, and others because they will need to. They also talked about that this next incoming generations will have higher expectations for the quality of service and the accessibility of services, including the ability to access services on apps and technologies. The elder care and caregiving crisis and challenges are continuing to intensify. The primary theme here was, or the primary message, I should say, is that the theme around people needing care will significantly exceed the available caregiving workforce. And then the integration of health and social services is growing. And most stakeholders saw this as being very beneficial, and that it could produce opportunities for more partnership across the health and social sectors. It could produce opportunities for more coordinated and a holistic approach to care and service delivery. And mostly positive around this trend, with the exception of many of the stakeholders were concerned about the medicalization of social care as this integration continues to grow. And then finally, challenges in accessing services will persist. And mostly stakeholders talked about, hey, we need more services and resources, and specific regions need more services and resources. And they talked a lot about the rural communities where local hospitals are shutting down. There's a lack of providers, and they really kind of painted a scene where the community-based care footprint was non-existent. So before I jump into that last trend, if I was just to step back and kind of do a bottom line to the trends I just talked a little bit about, stakeholders forecasted a future where demand for age-related care and services is going to be high with new levels of intensity. The supply to meet that demand will likely be low or lower if we look at the trends in caregiving, stress systems of health and social care. And the care and services that will be available will need to be delivered in a streamlined, integrated manner with more specialization around areas such as dementia, behavioral health, homelessness, and will need to be catered to generations that actually don't know a time when using apps and technology to access services existed. But as one stakeholder said, we have the ability in California to envision a different future, partly because of leadership with the state and partly because of the aging population will demand this of us. So stakeholders very much recognize that there is strong public and political will to prepare, commit resources, shift narratives, develop new care and service delivery models to serve older and more diverse Californians. And this brought them a lot of hope, which brings me to another big kind of theme area, which was around vision. And this set of stakeholders encompassed a pretty expansive vision of an age-friendly California. So when we asked them about their future versions of a California and their future versions of a California aging network, they often shared really broad aspirations around what successful aging would look like in California. They expressed their ideal future for older Californians. They talked a lot about what successful aging meant to them personally. They had lots of ideas on ideal communities to live in and inspiring care systems available when needed. So they talked about older adults living on their own terms, living very meaningful lives, affordable housing being very available, communities that are intergenerational and socially connected. They also talked about communities that are built with density and food and services and goods and create the conditions to be around people more often and have that social connectivity. They're climate resilient and emergency ready. They envisioned a whole person care system that really focused on longevity, wellness, and prevention. And then they imagined an age-friendly California where long-term care is more accessible, more affordable. And I love this one, caregiving is considered essential for a functioning society and paid accordingly. Now, stakeholders acknowledged that some of these aspirations were beyond what the California Aging Network could achieve, but they also encouraged the California Aging Network and the stakeholders working on the California 2030 project to really expand our imaginations, to think about what is the role or what could the role be of the California Aging Network in creating this future vision of an age-friendly California. So with that, I'm going to pass the baton to Jacob, and he's going to talk a little bit more about the specifics around the ideal traits and also some of the action that we heard from stakeholders. And then we will open it up for your questions and comments. So Jacob, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Lori. And good morning, everybody. It's nice to visit with you this morning. So Lori really covered kind of the external factors that the stakeholders were seeing for California. And we then asked questions about the aging network specifically. And we were first interested in asking sort of what do they see as the ideal traits of a future-ready aging network. And then we also asked, what might it take to either strengthen those traits or to build those traits over time? So that's what I'll be covering. So first, the traits. As we listened and gathered information from the AD stakeholders, the trait that really kind of rose to the top was around being consumer-driven and relevant. What this means is, really understanding the target populations in a more detailed way, and also being able to target programs and services to those populations and be able to account for that, meaning able to demonstrate the ability to target. And that the programs and services continue to be relevant, which means they may need to evolve or adapt based on the needs and preferences and desires of the populations they're trying to serve. The next trait is around being equitable and inclusive, addressing inequalities, identifying how intersecting inequalities impact the populations they're serving. And so, a future-ready aging network sort of looks at its community with an equity lens, but also looks at itself and maybe its structure and even the systems that it's in with an equity lens to understand where are there gaps and barriers in services. The next area is visibility and accessibility. Stakeholders saw an ideal future-ready aging network being highly visible and easily accessible. This is one that is well branded. It's maybe it's sort of commonly known from community to community, from county to county. and that there is significant awareness, even if somebody isn't necessarily seeking out or looking in the here and now, they're aware that the resource exists and they know how to get to it. The next area is around demonstrating consistency. And this is both a sort of a combination of there being really a standard set of services and activities, regardless of where people live. So older adults across the state of California have basically a shared ability to access the same set of core services delivered through the aging network, while there's also a sort of an area where the AAAs can flex and customize services and modalities to the specifics and nuances of their population. So kind of a combination of a greater consistency and flexibility. The next area was serving as a backbone for aging services. And what this really means is sort of this idea of a one-stop shop, or the one-stop shop for navigating aging resources and accessing aging services across California communities. And that the AAAs, or the AAA parts of the AAA function, would be serving as this sort of agnostic resource for, again, understanding, navigating, and accessing services and supports involving aging. The sixth area, the sixth trait, was around cultivating partnerships, becoming even more partnership driven. This is both, I think, on the funding side, on the programmatic side, and on the advocacy side as well. A future-ready aging network has strategic partnerships and alliances across those domains and at the local, state, and maybe even the national or federal level. And the last area, the last trait that came through, was around performance and becoming more performance-based, focusing more attention and energy on the value of the services, the value that's being created by these services to each individual, to communities, to the state as a whole, and really being able to demonstrate that value through understanding and measuring outcomes and consumer outcomes. And this kind of came up again and again in kind of just the picture of the aging network as needing to become more data-driven, but also as it begins to intersect more with public health and with healthcare that are highly data-driven and value and outcomes driven, that there's a desire to see the aging network evolve into also being much more performance-based. So now, again, those are sort of the high level traits, principles, if you will, that these stakeholders saw in an ideal future-ready aging network. And then this last section is really where we dove in to action. So how might an aging network that is future-ready, sort of dial into or lean into those traits to address, and face the trends, challenges, opportunities of the future that Lori had highlighted earlier. So the first area that came through was around addressing the need for change. And this is really kind of a combination of knowledge and culture and philosophy, I think, is what we heard. Really anticipating and preparing for change. Again, the data-driven part comes through around really understanding not only the numbers of Californians who are aging in place and living longer, but what does that mean for the work of the aging network, programs and services, planning, advocacy, etc. Clarifying organizational goals and the desired role in a changing market. So really understanding, again, that sort of strategic position of the aging network, of the AAAs in this, expected future and desired future. And then stakeholders also identified the risk of not changing. So looking at what happens if there is not a desire for change, or there's not a push for change, is that they see the aging network becoming irrelevant or getting lost sort of in other programs and services and even market-based opportunities that are also trying to to meet the needs of older adults. And the risk of that is also gaps in the system that will inevitably persist that won't be filled. Again, the stakeholders see the AAAs as filling critical gaps in the systems and really being designed that way. The next area is around improving workforce capacities and capabilities. So again, how do we achieve a future-ready aging network? It is doubling down on workforce development and growth. And so these are areas both internal to the aging network, but also external to the systems that the aging network works within. Things like, making careers more attractive and more rewarding for folks, ensuring that the workforce is aligned with the populations being served, meaning that they're representative of populations, that workers understand and are culturally aligned with or responsive to the individuals that they're catering to or working with, and that that the organizations themselves are desirable workplaces for folks. The next area is around fostering greater collaboration between CDA and the AAAs. Oh, I'm sorry. The next area is around assessing local AAA governance structures. And what we heard from stakeholders in this area was really the variation of AAAs in terms of service offerings or service arrays, in terms of resources available, in terms of impact and influence in their communities, and there being an interest in exploring, what works and what doesn't work within the different types of governance structures. And we particularly heard folks, explore kind of the pros and cons of the nuances of the AAAs and their different, again, scales and orientations to their communities. And there being a need to really do, a greater assessment and understanding of those sort of strengths and challenges, or those pros and cons of different approaches, and identify promising practices in that as well. The next area is fostering greater collaboration between CDA and the AAAs. While we did hear from some stakeholders that there is definitely a renewed effort in the aging world in general to be much more proactive and strategic. We heard from stakeholders opportunities to for CDA and AAA to work together on things like reframing aging, of destigmatizing aging, both in their own practices, but also as a sort of an advocacy opportunity out to the sort of the broader environment, advocating for increased funding or practice and policy changes that are favorable to older adults, that make services more maybe amenable or easy to access for older adults. Bringing more people into the caregiving workforce or the broader aging workforce, and working together on leveraging data, utilizing and leveraging data to improve quality, and again, as I said earlier, to demonstrate value back to stakeholders, back to funders, back to taxpayers, back to advocates. And the next area is around diversifying and increasing funding sources. So again, sort of tied to some of those advocacy opportunities. Stakeholders saw, a future-ready aging network really forging a future that is much more diversified in its funding, not only focusing on state and federal grants and state and federal funding, but really becoming more proactive on attracting and retaining additional types of funding, including funding from healthcare organizations like managed care plans, like hospitals and clinics. Folks also brought up private pay opportunities and sliding scale methods for consumers that may be able to afford them. And also sort of renewed efforts on fundraising and grants, particularly for innovative ideas, or to scale certain programs or services in joint efforts, multiple agencies or agency and department efforts to attract more public and private grant funding to continue to expand. And the last area is enhancing advocacy activities. And stakeholders saw a tremendous opportunity for the California Aging Network to go beyond thinking about policies as they directly impact AAAs and CDA in their programs and services, and really toward looking out at the consumer experience and becoming more activated around the issues that are impacting older adults locally and at the state and federal levels. So in addition to advocating for the continued growth of the California Aging Network, looking beyond and peripheral to the network, building alliances with other advocacy organizations, be it from healthcare or public health, human services, maybe even the private sector, to build greater awareness, public and political, about the needs, desires, and interests of older adults, and the imperatives of the system to really be to anticipate what the future will look like. And finally, this point is also mobilizing older adults. So stakeholders also saw an opportunity for the AAAs in particular to activate even more so maybe their advisory councils or volunteer bases to also become advocates for older adults in their communities, as well as potentially advocates for the California Aging Network at the state level or even at the federal level. And that the AAAs, given their deeply embedded role in communities, also have an opportunity to communicate issues locally and activate local advocacy activities. So some of the policy areas that came through in our interviews, things like livable wages for workers in the caregiving workforce, areas around emergency preparedness, healthcare and service financing, including Medi-Cal policy or future Medi-Cal policies, and opportunities to try to bring the AAAs even more so into the Medi-Cal picture. And then at the federal level too, also efforts to align advocacy around favorable changes to the Older Americans Act. So we certainly invite you to engage with the report when it is published. And I believe I'm turning it over to Connie now.
Thank you, Jacob. So now we're going to head into our Q&A portion of today's webinar. If you have any questions, you can utilize our Q&A box down at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can type in your question, or right now we'll allow some time for you to click on your raise the hand icon, and we can open your microphones live to answer your questions. So I'll just give it a quick minute and see if anybody wants to raise their hand and answer questions. Let's look through the Q&A box. There were a few questions asking about the report and also the recording. Those will be made available after this webinar. So you can, there is a page on the CDA homepage under highlights, and you'll see it says CDA2030. So we will post the presentation and the recording there, but we will also have a recap email that goes out to all the attendees as well that will also highlight all the links. So let's see, I don't see any hands raised. Oh, there's one. So I see Leslie Smith. We are now going to open your microphone and you can ask your question.
Yeah, my question was, this is very good and very comprehensive and quite exciting. But one of the things that we tend to do as we age or can do is isolate ourselves rather than intergenerational. And I wondered, I didn't see any mention of that. Maybe I missed it and I apologize. But I'm very concerned that we don't just, kind of stick older people over there in the corner and say, okay, we're taking care of them. With reality, we're, kind of putting them on the side. So I just don't, what is that a major theme, the integration, intergenerational? That's my question.
Yeah, thank you, Leslie. Yes, in fact, because we were going so fast, I had to breeze breeze over some of the parts in the vision section. But that was a big theme around socially connected communities, intergenerational, creating the conditions for social connection to happen, and not just kind of hoping that they do happen, and talking a lot about the stats around social isolation. So there was quite a bit of commentary around in the ideal that would need to be a focus. And Erin, Erin has joined our team, folks, and she was also heavily involved in not only the interviews, but in working on the interview synthesis. But Erin, feel free to jump in if there's anything that you want to add.
Sure, I think.
Oh, sorry, Erin, go ahead.
All right, I would just expand on that to say it was, the broader vision, but also specific examples and ideas around intergenerational programs within the schools, or camps, or daycare. So there was certainly a lot of good ideas and thoughts around that topic.
And Leslie, does that answer your question? And I'll say, I know I said this, but I'll just repeat it. In the actual report, there's also a huge amount of appendices included, and we tried to capture almost every idea that stakeholders offered us.
Great. No, I'm encouraged to see that that's a cross category value that is going to be worked on as a policy and advocacy effort. Thank you.
Oh, Connie, it looks like you're talking, but
Sorry. Thank you, Leslie, for that question. If anyone else has any questions, please feel free to click on the raise your hand icon at the bottom of your screen if you have any questions pertaining to what has been presented today. Again, today is the first part of a 3-part series. I have another hand. I see Tatiana Faso. We will open your microphone and you can ask your question.
Thank you. And I put it into the question section also. Will the final report address any implementation timeframes and any legislative action that will need to take place to implement those suggestions?
I'm going to take one stab, and Susan, I might turn to you to weigh in too. Yes, we did not this report per se, but if you remember when I gave the kind of the snapshot of the project approach, so there's multiple waves of kind of research and due diligence, and then we'll be working with the steering committee to kind of think through what are the different scenarios and what are the different possibilities, and then also working with the steering committee to put forth a set of recommendations, actionable recommendations that would go to CDA. And then CDA, Susan, I will let you pick up where I'm leaving off if you wanted to jump in and talk a little bit more about that.
Sure, that's exactly right, Lori, and thank you, Tatiana, for that question. So all of this will be made public and be transparent. So in terms of a legislative agenda or regulatory or budget actions, I don't think it will be, there will be pieces of it that may be picked up. There might be multiple opportunities. Advocates might see something in this that they want to seize upon. The Department of Aging might find opportunities that we work on across the California Health and Human Services Agency. But I don't think you will see a big marquee that says this is the legislative agenda. And part of why it's titled California 2030 is we expect, as you heard today, just one sliver of the work. Much of this will be unpacked over multiple years.
Okay, I have another Taria Lanalia. We're going to unmute you and you can ask your question.
Thank you, Taria Lanala. My question is, I contacted my local survey, and I was not able to get much information, although they were aware of it. Can you provide a status update on getting the CASOA survey out to stakeholders.
I'm sorry, Tari, I think you were breaking up a little bit. Could you repeat your question again? We couldn't quite catch that. We just heard something about a survey.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
I'm interested in a status update on the TESOA survey. I had heard it was in June, but looks like not.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Nakia Theory, and I am the branch chief for the Older Adults Program branch. Very nice to meet everyone and very happy to be in attendance today. I can provide that status update on the CASEO survey. So the CASEO needs assessment survey is scheduled to be released to the public in July, excuse me. So right now it is with the printer and we are getting all mailing material prepared. And it is going to be going out. Our AAA partners will be receiving all information related to that. And then we will have open participation towards the end of July, beginning of August. So please plan on expecting that to be released very soon. We do anticipate right now that it should be released in or around, let's say July, the second to third week of July. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Nakia. And thank you all for the questions. Looking at the clock, we're coming up on time. So just wanted to wrap this real quickly. Thank you again for all your questions. Susan, did you want to do the close or we're going to Lori?
Honey,
Sorry,
Yes.
Lori. Okay.
we actually have until 10:15.
Oh, is it 10:15? Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay,
if there is a
sorry.
couple more questions, great. If not, we can definitely do a wrap.
Okay. So let's see if there's any other attendees that have any questions, please feel free to click on the raise your hand icon and we will unmute you and you can ask your question live. Going through the Q&A, it looks like we still have quite a few questions asking about the report and that will be published again. You'll see a link off of the CDA homepage under highlights. It'll say CA2030, but we will also recap the links with attendees that attended today's webinar as well. Yeah, I don't see any other questions that are related to what has been presented so far. Oh, we got one more question here. Will Tift, we're going to unmute you and you can ask your question.
Good morning. I was wondering about the 80 stakeholders that were interviewed. Will their names be in the report? Is that anonymous? And the reason I ask is I wonder about the frame of reference that they come, to this conversation with, based on where they have lived, where they have worked, and whether that's primarily, if there's overrepresentation of, say, Los Angeles and San Francisco Bay Area versus the Central State, the North State, more suburban and rural counties.
Well, thank you. It's a great question. We are in the process of, we have a list of stakeholders and we've included it in the back of the report. We do need to go back and ask stakeholders if they're okay with their names being listed. If they're not okay, what we will do is show like stakeholder category with stakeholder role and maybe not call out the exact name, but we're pretty sure that folks will be okay with us listing their name. And I didn't mention this in my comments, but I'll mention it now, is that we went through a pretty hefty stakeholder mapping process, which included working with, we went through kind of what are we trying to achieve through the engagement process, what types of questions do we want answered, and then who are the individuals and organizations that would be best suited. And we worked with CDA, multiple sessions on mapping those stakeholders. We worked with the steering committee and mapping. So, and we kept that list was supposed to be around 50 and it kept getting up and larger and larger. So That just a little backdrop, Will, but thank you for the question, and hopefully that satisfies your question.
Great, thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay, any other questions? Please click on the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screens and we can open your microphone and you can ask your question live. Just give it another minute if there's anyone that would like to ask a question. Looking in the Q&A, I don't see any that are pertaining to exactly what was presented today. And again, the presentation and today's recording will be posted on our website if anyone needs access to it. Go to our homepage under highlights and you'll see it under the CA2030 link. Looks like, do we have a follow-up question from Tatiana? Can we unmute her mic?
Yes, thank you. It has to do with the CASOA. Will the AAAs get extra supplies in case they want to send some out to people who did not receive it?
So as far as extra supplies, there will not be extra supplies given to the AAAs. However, there will be an opportunity for open participation where a link will be provided if people choose to participate via the online platform. We do know that some of our AAA partners have indicated that they plan on making copies of the hard copy survey to be distributed, but that would be at their discretion to do so. As far as extra copies being given, there will not be extra copies given, but there will be the online platform for open participation and those AAAs who are choosing to make copies of the hard copy that will be provided to them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, about one more call for questions. If you have a question, feel free to click on the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen and we will open your microphone and you can ask your question live. And I'm not seeing any hands being raised. So let's go ahead and move towards concluding what's been presented today, and I'll toss it over to you, Lori.
Great. Thank you. And I just have a couple closing comments, one being thank you for participating. Thank you for your great questions. I also want to acknowledge there's a few Q&A questions that I responded to personally, and we'll make sure you get the information that you're asking for. Please join us for the next webinar. I say this with a smile because the interviews with the AAAs were Jacob and Allison and Aaron and Nathan, that partly they were in the field, they visited folks in person, and then if we couldn't do in person, we did virtual, but we had an opportunity, like I said earlier, to talk to multiple individuals with every AAA in the state of California. So the synthesis is rich, and we hope that you'll join us in July. It looks like July 24th, same time, same place, to hear what we learned from the AAAs. And with that, Jacob, is there anything else that you would like to say before we sign off?
No, thank you.
Okay, Susan, how about from you? Anything before we say goodbye?
Just final thanks to the collaborative consulting team and to our California 2030 steering committee. And I failed to mention that CDA executives have been assigned to each of those 6 areas, and we have subject matter experts that are working alongside collaborative consulting and the steering committee. So my thanks to our CDA staff as well. And we'll see you for the next one in
Thanks,
July.
everyone. Have a good weekend.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.